Much like our vice president, I love Venn diagrams. You know, where you've got the two or three circles with the overlap. I just love them. I do. On this episode of Forge and Anvil, I will get to put my use of my enjoyment, I should say, of Venn diagrams to the test as we explore the overlap between the political ideology of libertarianism and the Christian faith. How much overlap do these worldviews have? Are Christianity and libertarianism even compatible? Tonight, I will be joined by Clint Russell of Liberty Lockdown, We Are Change, and Timcast fame, as well as Will Spencer of Renaissance of Men to explore these exact questions. The goal for this episode is not going to be to alienate Christian libertarians or non-Christian libertarians, but instead, my hope is that we can find clarity in our discussion so that we can unite in as many areas as we can. Likewise, my hope is that we can avoid fighting over where we differ when possible in order to defeat the current state religion of wokeness that we find ourselves living under today. Welcome to Forge and Anvil, where we hammer out uncomfortable conversations about culture, theology, and politics to sharpen ourselves for the race set before us. My name is Connor. I am host of this podcast. I am a father, a husband, and a Christian, and I just want to see Christ glorified in all that I do. So thank you for joining us. Like I said, I am joined tonight by Will Spencer. So Will, go ahead and introduce yourself to those who are not yet familiar.
Hey Connor, it's good to be back here. Thank you for setting the stage and letting me know what to expect tonight, and to land squarely in the intersection of the Venn diagram rather than exploring the gap between the two. For those who don't know me, I'm Will Spencer. I'm the host of the Renaissance of Men podcast, which you can find by going to renofmen.com/links. You can also find me starting trouble on Twitter and Instagram at renofmen, and I run one-on-one men's mentorships and a men's accountability group. And you can find all of that by going to renofmen.com/links.
Awesome. Well, welcome back as always, Will. And for those of you who saw our thumbnail, we did not pull your chain. Clint will be on the podcast, but he is actually finishing up. He's currently live with We Are Change. They're probably wrapped up right about now, and he should be on his way to his studio where he will be joining us momentarily. So be sure to stick around. Before we get started, though, I do want to go ahead and shout out our last episode. I had Joshua Hames on the podcast talking about how post-millennialism destroyed his church plant. It was an awesome conversation. I highly recommend checking it out. Be sure to like and share this video. It does boost us in the algorithms. Unfortunately, we are at their mercy. Be sure to follow us on Twitter at ForgeandA for additional content and updates on the show. Follow us on all platforms. It's great if you can follow us multiple places so you never miss us. Share this video and repost the stream on X, and join us in the chat on Monday nights if you're watching the playback, because we are live and we will take your chats on Rumble and YouTube. So if you're watching this currently on X, jump over to Rumble or YouTube if you want to be a part of the conversation. But anyways, let's just dive straight into it. So yeah, Will, like I said, I'm really hoping that this conversation with you and Clint can be really beneficial to finding some clarity in ways that we can better unify with people on the right. And when I say the right, I'm talking about anyone who's not part of the left. That's kind of a Charles Haywood definition. He's really big on no enemies on the right. And you know, it's definitely a philosophy I've been exploring a lot of, and I've always, I think, felt it. But Charles is much better at putting it into words than I have been. And ultimately, it's an idea that I don't think works in, of course, the church. But I think when it comes to the political sphere, it's definitely an effective ideology. It's just the idea that we try to stay as unified as possible on the political issues, at least, in order to honestly defeat the people that are actually in power. Because if we're being realistic, libertarians have very little influence in terms of the actual politics and policies, and so do conservatives. Republicans might have, you know, the House and a decent amount of elected officials, but actual conservative ideology is sparsely represented. So that's kind of where the angle I'm coming at from this conversation. Feel free to, you know, jump in here with any initial thoughts before we kind of move on with our discussion.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I understand the idea. The thing that I really want to point out is that I think the unity of the left is an illusion created by the fact that they are funded by the money printer. So that if you were to switch off these sources of institutional DEI, cash, corruption flowing through like Sam Bankman-Fried and stuff like that, if you were to switch that off, I think all the unity of the left would dissolve. And I think it's entirely funded. Certainly that doesn't mean that everyone on the left is paid, but it means that there are a substantial number of genuinely paid actors who are essentially mercenaries who act as agitators for money. And so that creates the feeling of unity because there's an economic incentive. Whereas on the right, there is no such large scale funding going on. Well, on the right, meaning like true conservatism. I don't mean like, Republican rhino right. So I think we're up against because when I was on the left, which I was, like I was part of Occupy Wall Street and all that stuff in 2012, the left said the same thing, that the Republicans are so the right is so super unified, we need to band together. So I think, I think we're obviously 10 years on, and so we can see that yes, the left does appear to be more unified, but I think they have a strategic advantage. So as far as like no enemies on the right politically, yes, I think there are places where that breaks down, particularly abortion. It appears to be one place, as we talked about on the last discussion that I had with the woman whose name escapes me right now. That's a flashpoint. I think it's conceptually possible, but obviously there are places where the Venn diagram overlaps, and there are places where it doesn't. And something needs to be worked out to determine who will give way on what. And I don't know how that takes place, but it has to.
Yeah. And I agree with you on that. I think the frustration I have, I was talking to, it was when we had Andrew Isker on, I was really talking about the frustration of people wanting to start these turf wars and get super tribal, especially when it comes to, punching at other individuals on the right. And again, I'm talking, when I say right, just for clarification's sake, I'm talking anyone not on the left. And, a prime example, just to talk about something that happened in the political realm very recently, is just this last week, Republicans, they just booted out George Santos from Congress because he basically lied about a bunch of different things. And of course, he's Republican. You look at his actual voting record, though, he's actually voting fairly conservative compared to so many different members of the House. But they booted him out of Congress for lying. And of course, all the Republicans, had their soapbox moment of, we're all about integrity and we have to police our own side. And it's like, dude, we're in an ideological war, though. And you just shrank your majority, very, very slim majority, by one more seat. And I believe the governor of New York now gets to appoint the replacement of that seat. So they essentially just handed over a seat in Congress to a Democrat. And my when I was talking with Andrew Isker, it's like my frustration is, it's like, I don't care what the differences the elves and the dwarves have to, this is the analogy I used here. It's like the orcs are at the gate in the Hornburg. Can we calm down and settle those differences later? And to your point, like you were saying, eventually we're going to have to talk about the areas of the Venn diagram in which we do not overlap and we have some serious differences on, like for libertarian movement as opposed to the Christian movement. And we'll talk a lot more about this when Clint joins us. But things that I can think of that will immediately have some issues on would probably be like the legalization of certain substances. But at the end of the day, I view a lot of that stuff as, when we fight about that right now, I view it like we're measuring the curtains for the Oval Office when we haven't even gotten anywhere close to winning the election. And it's like, it's just, to me, it's just ridiculous in terms of people not prioritizing, who's actually a threat to your liberty. And then from there, can we unify in as many areas as we can to actually, politically and theoretically eliminate that threat to our liberties. And that's ultimately where, I'm coming from with so many of my conversations lately, because, you and I run in so many similar circles, Will, where we talk to people, in the sort of theology space and
Yeah.
Christian Twitter, Christian content creating, and there's a lot of turf wars happening in different theology areas, and I think that those are important discussions to have. But what frustrates me is the amount of times that we actually split from each other over these issues, and
Right.
that's super frustrating because it's just like people really they want to just LARP. They want to LARP and they want to fight these battles that are not real hard battles to fight. It's easy to go and police your own side and to fight against someone that doesn't actually have institutional power to use against you. But it's a whole other thing to actually pick the fight with someone that could actually damage you.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. No, I mean, I'm grateful for one thing, I guess, which is that these discussions go from being very conceptual to being very practical once a candidate is chosen, right? And so we can have there's a real fundamental divide in the libertarian viewpoint and the Christian viewpoint where rights come from, because where rights come from determines so many other side aspects, like what is a right, how are and the nature of government, the nature of collective organization, the nature of justice. All of these things are wrapped up in the notion of where does a right come from, and that's very practical, and it's very important, and it's very important on a societal level to know, for example, that rights do not come from government. Rights also do not issue spontaneously from ourselves by virtue of the fact that we exist. For example, they also aren't given to us by some process when we choose to be rational animals. We are endowed by our creator with rights, and those rights are to serve a purpose. And that's a really important question because that also determines so many other things. So, that's at a conceptual level, but at a very practical level, it all does ultimately boil down to which candidate are we going to support in this election? And you saw this. I was not paying attention to the 2016 election. I was overseas. I had just kind of assumed that it was going to be Hillary Clinton's coronation, but I've gone over some of the game footage, let's say, and I've looked into the way that many Christians were arguing about whether or not to vote for Donald Trump. Yep. Particularly Doug Wilson and John Piper was a classic one. And, a lot of Christians very rightfully said that they can't support a man like Donald Trump who isn't Christian, but is a braggart and boastful and, has his own sordid past. But how can you vote for a man who will advance your causes? Right. And that's the sort of thing where these big conceptual discussions that we can get into forever about where do rights come from, which there's even soteriological aspects to this, like God's sovereign grace. Is someone, elect or not, the Holy Spirit, like, whoa, that's way outside of my pay grade.
Right.
These issues.
It's so easy to just immediately find these different forks in the road that we can immediately split off at.
Yes. But then ultimately, we have to find, like, when it comes down to something really practical, whether it be on a ballot or a candidate or a ballot measure or something like that, can we align on this pragmatic, practical thing? I think that's very possible and in some sense easier.
Yeah. Shara Joel joined us in the chat. She said, in Colorado, the GOP made a deal with the Libertarian Party so that libertarians won't run candidates. They claim that is what is making Republicans lose elections. They neglect the fact that looks like it cut off your rest of your comment, Shara. There we go. Republican Party in Colorado is absolute garbage. Always running wimpy, weak, moderate Republicans that are all rhinos. They also sabotage the governor race. Yeah, and a couple of things to say to that, Shara. First of all, I saw that with the Libertarian Party, and this is something that I plan on bringing up when Clint jumps on. I think some of the best Republicans in office are very libertarian that happen to run as Republicans. Like Thomas Massie is one of the most principled people that we have in Congress. I'm sure there are areas that, again, if we wanted to sit down with Thomas Massie, he'd probably be, for maybe the use of certain substance legalization and things like that, mostly just because he's so against big government. And I understand that, because you can definitely argue, even from a Christian perspective, that, that's not the place of the government. The government's job is not to keep you safe. That's not their role. It's to administer justice. But either way, to your second point, Shara, about the Republican Party being garbage in Colorado, what's funny to me is that it seems like even in swing states, it seems like some of the more right wing, less squishy Republicans actually do a better job, or at least it appears that way. Because I think that they're painting a vision, even if it's not a vision that is necessarily popular in that state. I think people just don't like to fall for individuals that seem super squishy and willing to, bend at the whims of public opinion. And that people, when a politician has to put polling out to see what their vote should be, I mean, that's a problem. And unfortunately, I think you're right. A lot of the Republican Party puts up these guys that you don't actually really know where they're going to be on so many important issues, and it's like, how can we expect to earn people's trust? Because at least with a lot of the progressives that run for office, you at least know where they're coming from in terms of what positions they're going to hold once they get to DC or to the governor's mansion or whatever the position they're running from. So yeah, I unfortunately, it seems like the Republican Party just so often doesn't know who it wants to be. It's a real identity crisis.
I think the Republican Party, it wants to have, like many Americans, it wants to have all the benefits of American modernity as long as possible before the inevitable sacrifice to globalism. I don't think that the Republican Party has any desire to really stop anything or the willpower to stop anything, because it has no principles on which to base its resistance. And so without principles to base its resistance on, something positive or something affirmative to fight for, a vision to fight for, then it's just going to be saying no, 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 no. Like, and in some sense, the language that we use to describe these things reaffirms this: progressive, progress, and conservative, conserve, right? The problem with conservative is, like, there's nothing left to conserve. You're just conserving the status quo, and the status quo has moved so far down the drain that you're just conserving where it is. What are you conserving other than the status quo? Nothing. So we need a shift in language. This is why I like Christian nationalism, is that it's an affirmative vision. Stephen Wolf's book, The Case for Christian Nationalism, the vision that he lays out, you don't have to agree with every piece of it, but he put forth an affirmative vision for an actual functional thing based on actual historical theological principles. And so something like that is what's needed. What are we fighting for? And Republicans don't have that to fight for. They have no principles to fight for. So they just lose in slow motion.
Right. And, for myself, I'm still fairly undecided about Christian nationalism, even though I've had a lot of different discussions kind of around my circle about it. And a lot of that's just because, to be honest, I haven't read the actual arguments. I don't want to base my decision off of Twitter arguments and straw men that people build up. And so, that's something I haven't fully explored. And I think I might, it's probably long overdue and I'll need to do it at some point. But, I finally got his Stephen Wolf's book free for no quarter November. So we'll probably finally get into it once I can actually read the arguments, assuming that I'm not too dumb to figure them out. But
no.
But to your point,
almost definitely not too dumb.
Well, I appreciate you having faith in me. At least someone does. So, but I definitely think, to your point though, to put it in a different way, it boils down to vision, like you said, and that's what Stephen Wolf did in his book. But that's what Donald Trump did in 2016. He took something that people griped about for a long time. No one necessarily actually running for the presidential ticket was griping about immigration, but many of the base were concerned about immigration for a long, long time. And then he put it into a very tangible thing when he said, a big, beautiful wall from sea to shining sea, and that's when you actually take that's when you can actually channel the frustrations that these people already have, but then he put it into a very practical action step of, this is what we're going to do. My administration is going to build a wall. And of course, now everyone's saying that they're going to build a wall because, he's popularized that so much that the Overton window shift. And there's no way, at least not in any time soon, that Republicans are going to be able to back out of the build a wall campaign promise,
Mm-hmm.
anytime soon, which is, I mean, it's awesome to see people like Nikki Haley, someone that probably would never have thought to say build a wall if she had been a candidate in 2016, to see her saying that on stage, because ultimately it was Trump who shifted that over to window. And again, he used something very tangible to actually put action to frustrations that this political movement was feeling. It was brewing under the surface, but they needed someone to channel it. And that's what he did when he said, build a wall. And again, you can hate Trump or not. That's just what happened in terms of marketing, whether you like him or not. That's just ultimately my observation of how it actually got him into the White House.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And I think maybe the difference between, oh gosh, is it really 2024? The difference between 2016 and 2024 will be, Trump had a unique social media friendly, sloganeering, catchphrasey kind of style that was really calibrated for the mobile age in a way that like Obama 2012 like wasn't, right. So 2016 he just had his finger on some cultural zeitgeists. Of course you had the memers and all that stuff. I don't know that advantage exists in 2024 anymore. It was sort of like something that was unique to its moment, and perhaps he can recapture some of that meme magic, let's say. But I think 2024 will be decided. And look at RFK Jr. RFK Jr. has become wildly popular because he actually says many of the things as like, oh, wow, someone's actually saying something substantial about issues that a lot of people care about. I think that's what will decide 2024 in a unique way versus what 2016 and 2020 was a total anomaly for so many reasons, but what 2016 was about.
Yeah, I agree. And Clint has just popped in the stream. So welcome, Clint. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for having me, and my
Yeah.
my twin brother Will over here. Apparently,
Good to see you, man. Good to
Yeah,
see you.
looking great, guys. I think I need to
yeah, just
need to
get rid
shave
of it,
that all
brother.
off.
It's much more aerodynamic. You swim better. Just do it.
Solar powered,
Solar
baby.
powered. That's awesome. Cool. Well, Clint, since you're jumping straight in here, feel free to just go ahead and introduce yourself to anyone who may not be familiar with who you are.
Sure. Clint Russell, host of Liberty Lockdown, co-host of the We Are Change, aka the best political podcast.com, with myself and Luke Rutkowski and Steph. It's kind of a Timcast IRL, but we just signed a deal with Rumble, so we go three nights a week over there. It's going really well. And I also co-host a very degenerate comedy show called Tower Gang on Wednesday nights. You can find that on YouTube or Rumble. We delete them on YouTube every time after we record. So if you want to see the backlog with Owen Benjamin and Gavin McInnes and all these other great comedians, Sam Tripoli, we've had an amazing lineup. You can find that on Rumble. It's Tower Gang. So thanks for having me, guys.
Yeah, of course. And thank you for spending some of your evening with us. I know you just got done streaming with Luke, so we appreciate that. You'll have to bring him next time too, so we can harass him as well. But
I haven't even invited Luke on Liberty Lockdown. He's so busy and stressed out. I'm like, it'll happen eventually.
Right. He does good work. But yeah, so I mean, we were talking a lot about 2024, and at the start of the episode, we just kind of were laying out some of the ideas for our conversation that we were hoping to have with you. Obviously, I mentioned to you already in our conversations leading up to the episode that we wanted to talk a lot about Christianity and libertarianism, and we wanted to mostly focus in on Venn diagrams. As our vice president so wonderfully reminds us how much she loves each day. We want to focus mostly on the area that overlaps because I was telling Will, one of the biggest frustrations that I see is that there currently we get into fights with people that don't actually have institutional power all the time. And we oftentimes avoid actually worrying about the big fish that's actually about to swallow us. And I was telling Will, to me, it really does feel like we are living under a state religion of wokeness. And those who do not adhere to it are going to be prosecuted one way or another, whether that be socially or legitimately by the DOJ or whatever weaponized government faction may come knocking. But either way, I mean, I know that we can definitely get into some of the differences that we have, and I'm totally all for that. But my goal for tonight was not necessarily a debate, but we can definitely do some of that if you guys want to for funsies. But mostly
Sure.
to focus in on having as much unity as possible, because I really do feel like the runway is short when it comes to the state of our country. And we need to start turning the plane around right away. But I mean, maybe I'll just turn it over to you first, Clint, to maybe give your diagnosis, put on your doctor's coat to give us a diagnosis of where the country's at and how you think we're doing.
Well, Fauci ruined the doctor's coat. That would just make me a fraud if I would have put that on. But I think that's probably something that will bring us closer together. Is that from the libertarian vantage point, I am probably the most dire, the most concerned about the trajectory of things. I think that's part of the reason that my audience has grown so quickly, is that the people that find me are like, finally someone that understands that this is not a game, this is not a joke, this is serious, this is urgent, this is imminent. We cannot continue to just talk philosophically about empire collapse. We're living in it. So I think that's been, my imperative for getting involved in this in the first place. Is I started my show in May of 2020 because I was like, oh, totalitarianism is here. Like, it's not enough to just be sitting there going, well, we'll get them next year, we'll get them in 4 years, whatever. It's like, no, like, our national debt is 34 trillion. The interest that we're paying on our national debt is now more than our total defense. Our total defense is many magnitudes higher than a multitude of the largest militaries on earth. So that just goes to show the scale of the interest rate on our debt. It is dire. The financial condition of this nation is dire. The financial condition of the world is dire. It is awash in debt. My background is in finance. This is why I understand it so intimately, and why I talk about it so passionately, is that I understand that this is very, very perilous. So I don't know, wherever you want to go from there. That's my diagnosis as to where we sit today.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that. Yeah. We were talking, and Will actually gave me a thought, which is something that I've been thinking a lot about lately. And I feel like the average American is starting to wake up to this, but not nearly as much people are waking up as fast as they should. And it's the idea that the elites have a backup plan. They really do view our country as just something to extract as much wealth from as possible. And then if they end up wanting to go to New Zealand or something after all this is said and done, or move their company to China or wherever they feel like they can voyage off from once America fully collapses. That's something that they are constantly thinking about in the back of their mind. And the only reason why I bring that up is because I think it's important for people to understand that there's definitely a large percentage of people in elected office and just in areas of control, whether that be institutional power or what, soft power, hard power, whatever you name it. These people really are. There's a large faction of them that are intentionally managing this decline, and it is intentional. It's not just ignorance. I think that a lot of it could be chalked up to ignorance. There's probably useful idiots all along the way, but I really don't think that so much of this is just blind ideology making people stupid. Some of that is. But it's definitely a mixture. So maybe speak to that for a moment, Clint.
Sure. I mean, the foot soldiers are obviously useless idiots, but the vast majority of people have no concept of the greater plan. But it's a huge mistake to assume that all of this is just idiots that are destroying everything. Like, that's clearly not the case. There are brilliant people that are at the highest levels of power. They have stayed there through generations. If you think that's an accident, you're one of the useless idiots. Like, you need to be able to evaluate this and understand, like, you don't stay in power through generations if you're just doing it by happenstance. Like, that's just not how it works. So the reason I say that, and I can say so with confidence, is that I've recently read Tragedy and Hope by Carol Quigley, which is this historian that did this work for Harvard University. I think it was Harvard, back in the 1950s. And they were handed all of this information because they were supposed to be doing some sort of historical piece about these families and how essentially the British Empire managed to co-opt and retake control over America and turn it into its tip of the spear in terms of global conquest. And I think it has absolutely transpired. That's exactly what we're living through, is that the reason that the American politicians don't seem to care about the American people or our financial condition or the American soldier or anything else is because the people that are actually pulling their strings, the ones that actually put them into those positions of power, aren't concerned with us. We were gifted the ability to be the reserve currency of the world, and they have used that power to ultimately destroy the financial condition of America, and ultimately they will destroy the US dollar, and then they will migrate, my guess is, into a central bank digital currency. But that's a tale for maybe later on. But yes, it's very much orchestrated in a top-down fashion, and yes, they do have plans B, C, D, etc.
Yeah. And people don't realize how bad it could get if even just if one major catastrophic thing happened, which in my mind is the dollar losing its status as the world currency. If just that happened alone, I mean, overnight we would go from being, like a superpower to being, I don't want to say third world government, because it's not like the technology just vanishes offshore for us.
Right.
But the inflation, I mean, inflation could jump 20%. It can jump 150%. I mean, it happens in these places, that these other countries that have collapsed due to similar ideology at the helm. And so I don't want to paint such a dark picture that I make people black pilled, but to some degree, I want to talk about how realistic and grave our situation is, because to my point that I was talking about earlier before you came on, libertarians, they're very individualistic, and I definitely think to a fault. And I think that there's so many good things about the libertarian mindset that many Christian conservative individuals like Will and I agree with. There's a lot of overlap, and there's definitely places where we can push back. But we were talking about, like, for example, I'm sure an area that we would probably disagree on would be like the legalization of certain substances. But what I was telling Will earlier is, it's like some of those arguments, it's like, guys, we're like measuring the curtains for the Oval Office before we've even won the election. Like, like at no point are the Republicans anywhere close to being able to effectively criminalize some of those substances. That's not something that's going to be happening in the near future, because I just don't think that there's the votes to do it. And even to that point, there's not consensus on how far we go with those type of things. And I would probably go farther than some, and not as far as others. And that's how the conservative movement is in general. But ultimately, it just seems like a tertiary issue that right now you see people getting into these turf wars on Twitter about. And it's like, guys, can we just focus on the people that are currently actively locking up their political opponents first?
Well, certainly I agree that's a major issue, but I would push back on the war on drugs being a tertiary issue, in that, it's often the Christian conservatives that lament the state of family values in this country, and I don't think that there is a single policy that has destroyed the family unit more than the war on drugs, and certainly drug addiction plays a huge role in that too. So I'm not diminishing that aspect of it. Obviously, drug addicts are usually deadbeats and they don't take care of their kids, so that's a big problem too. But I don't think putting people that are nonviolent behind bars for using these substances is how you keep the family unit intact. If you look at the Black community, it has been demolished because of the war on drugs. We could also go back into the history of why that transpired, and the fact that the CIA was very actively funneling crack cocaine into the inner city with the intention of destroying the Black family. So that's the main reason that I focus on it as not being tertiary. I think it's a very important aspect of why our civilization is declining. But I do agree with you that there are graver threats that are more, I guess, urgent that we address. My concern, and the reason I don't vote conservative or Republican very often, is that I believe that the vast majority of the people in the Republican Party, the political class, is not working for my ends. It's not working for your ends either.
Right.
And I think that it's a huge mistake to just say, well, let's set our differences aside and let's vote for Mitt Romney. Like, all right, well then we're going to destroy ourselves a little bit slower. Like, golf clap,
Yeah.
Like, that doesn't do me much. And because I understand how dire the circumstances are, I refuse to go down with the John McCain Titanic. So that's kind of my perspective on this.
Yeah, and just for clarification's sake, again, when I say tertiary, I mean like it's just a battle that won't be happening anytime soon. At least not
Sure.
on not fully, not in the way that I guess the libertarians' worst nightmare would be, nor the Republicans, whoever the staunchest,
Their preferred path.
Like that's just not something that's going to happen anytime soon, because to your point, I could give pushback on some of those points that you said, but I'm sure there's actually a lot that you probably just know more about, and you took a different angle than I typically hear. I
Sure.
typically hear just the liberty argument, not the breakdown of families, and I appreciate that's actually your focus, because I think,
well, it's because I know my audience. I know my audience.
Yeah.
I know your weakness, so I'm going to hit you with it.
Well done. Just like a real politician. No, totally.
No. Someone was debate practice. That's I've been doing a lot of debates over the past 8-9 months, and I had never been in the debate circuit, but now I know. Oh, you have to actually approach your audience with what they care about, not with what you care about. So I don't go the liberty aspect with conservatives so much as I do the family values. But I do believe I own myself, and I don't think that you have a right, or anybody else has a right to put me behind bars because I want to put something in my body, even if it hurts me.
Yeah, I completely agree. So something that you talked about, you said that you don't vote Republican often or hardly ever, however you worded it. So I think something that I was telling Will before you jumped on here is, and this is something that maybe you have more knowledge in this area that I'm not aware of, and you understand some of the history better, but something that always... someone in the chat earlier, they mentioned how in Colorado, the Libertarian Party in Colorado, they made basically a deal to not run libertarian candidates against the GOP, but instead they kind of made a deal to basically have a greater impact on the primary. And to me, that's more of what I hope to see. Not because, I'm sure there's a lot of gatekeeping in the actual party itself, and I'm sure that's a lot of where we find some problems. But one of my favorite members in Congress is Thomas Massie, for example. He's one of the most principled individuals in Congress, and he votes with so much of what I believe. And I'm sure, again, if I sat down with Thomas Massie, I could figure out certain areas where we disagree. But for the most part, he votes how I want him to. And so why do you think it is that libertarians don't run more individuals in GOP primaries and try to make the GOP become more libertarian as a party itself, and work on maybe slowly, incrementally making an impact that way, as opposed to, running candidates that don't actually end up getting elected?
Right. Well, first off, let me start by saying Thomas Massie is awesome, and he is the only libertarian in Congress, and I'm glad to hear that you love him, because you should. He's amazing. But the primary reason that I'm not interested in GOP politics at this phase is for the opening monologue I gave you about how dire the circumstances are. We can't do this slow stuff. We can't expect to get 2 or 3 Thomas Massies in there over the next cycle, and then 2 or 3 more over the next cycle. And a decade from now, the U.S. dollar is dead, and all of our Thomas Massies have not been able to, stop the bleed. So that's the main reason that I don't think that there's any point in really going that direction. That's not to say that I would dissuade or discourage. I've actually considered it myself. I've considered, running for Congress under the Republican banner as a Thomas Massie-esque figure. But I just think that the truth, and this would have been a fantastic plan for the 1990s. That would have been great. That's what we should have been doing in the 1990s. The LP should have been running nobody and just putting our best candidates under the Republican banner and trying to get them in there. That would have been great. Too late. Didn't happen. So I guess that's the reason I don't support it now. I had another angle I was going to go with this, but I forgot what it was. So whatever else you guys would like to talk about.
Well, I actually want to jump in real quick and talk about the war on drugs, since you mentioned Christian conservatives.
Sure.
Let's be honest about what the war on drugs is. The war on drugs is not meant to be won. It's just meant to be continuous. The war on drugs is the militarization of the military industrial complex, being weaponized against the American public, end users and small time dealers, when the CIA, FBI, and the DEA all know full well where the drugs are coming from, who's producing them, and how they're getting into the country. This is an excuse that the government has used, and like all the wars that the United States has fought basically over the past 80 years, guess what? It's another war that's meant to be lost. right? Effectively, just so we can keep
Yep.
keep fighting it. So that
And endless. Yeah.
and endless. Yeah, exactly. Like we just keep losing slowly, right? So that the money keeps being spent. So while I'll agree with you that that the way that it has been framed to many Christian boomer conservatives, which I think is a really important, important generational distinction,
Yeah,
boomer
it is.
Christian conservatives, because they are their own unique demographic with their own unique, let's say, generational and historical shaping factors that make them blind to some very important things. While it's been framed to them as a defense of values, ultimately that is not what the war on drugs is about or has ever been about defending family values. It's all been about sending the money printer in new directions so we can weaponize, militarize our police forces. It's not actually about stopping drug use. Now, I do think.
Can I add one thing?
Yes, you can.
Let me just add one thing. It's also to fund the black ops for the CIA. That's also the main. Yeah, I mean, a huge part of the origination of that pipeline is CIA derived, and they profit off of. If you don't have to believe me, you can look into Ronald Reagan and Iran Contra.
No,
That's
I
exactly
do.
what it was.
Yeah,
So
we believe you.
Yeah, no, I know. I'm just saying for your audience's sake, and you know, I don't think that that's stopped, and I think that the war in Afghanistan was largely about the poppy fields. So it's like there's a lot that goes into this, but continue.
Yeah, and so I think we can separate the way that the war on drugs, what it is, and the way it's been conducted with the values of the family that it is seeking to protect in a mistaken kind of way. So, because I think that there's baby in this bathwater for what Christian conservatives today, meaning literally like 2023, you know, me, my bros on Twitter, and the things that we're advocating for, which is a return to the father-centric, I don't want to say nuclear family, because it's really the extended family community and household. So a reestablishment of these values, in a sense of family, church, and state government, right? Which is the natural order. So we can separate the war on drugs as being an unjust war conducted unjustly under unjust premises from the notion that a strong country comes from strong fathers, strong families, and strong households that need to be governed in particular ways by particular forces. And I think that's the part where libertarianism and Christianity begins to diverge, is the notion of individual rights versus, you know, these other spheres of government that we must righteously be subject to by righteous men. So we're not there yet. And so how in the meantime do we find common ground to work together towards common purpose while recognizing that our ends might be slightly different? That's the ambiguity that I think is difficult in our social media age to hold.
Yeah. Well, it's certainly hard to have any nuance with any of these conversations. People are very, very much ideologically possessed. But you know, I found it fascinating that, you know, you laid that all out, and then you said that this is where we part ways, and I was like, I don't disagree with any of this. So tell me what part of that you thought I disagreed with. I'm just curious.
So I would have expected that you disagree with the notion that as God's creatures, we are subject to three spheres of government: the family, the church, and the state. These are three independent, self-correcting, checks and balances forms of government that we are subject to.
Yeah, I guess the only difference of opinion that we have is that I think that it's the family, the church, and the gun. It's not the state. So if the church gets out of hand, the individual has the right to self-defense and to correcting civilization. I don't think that the state should ever be given that monopoly on violence. So that's the only difference that we have, is that I'm an anarcho-capitalist. I think that the state is a net negative almost always, and I think that you ought to course correct through your religious practices and the family unit, and ultimately your local community first and foremost. So that's a difference, certainly. But I also don't find that to be, you know, such a chasm that we can't get past it. So.
Sure. Okay. Yeah. I mean, okay. So it helps me to sort of understand the sort of libertarian that you are. There are many that are like, no government of any sort. I'm not subject to any form of government at all. I am a law unto myself. And there are some people who believe that, but I don't know that collective action is possible. Now, I also believe that the civil magistrate, the federal government is a net negative. And I think the taxes should be kept below 10% because tithing for churches is at 10%. And that will naturally keep the federal government at a really reasonable size, and state governments as well, because the family and the church makes up a lot of the quote unquote governing functions that we've outsourced to the state with the destruction of the moral structure of the family and the church.
Well, then you sound like a minarchist to me. You sound like someone who believes in very minimal government. If the tax rate was under 10%, the government would be very, very small compared to what it is today. This Goliath. So, from my vantage point, that's a totally reasonable compromise, simply because I want a state that is defeatable. I want a state that is so that is so inept that like a militia could actually defend themselves if it becomes totalitarian.
Technically, we're already at the inept state, but I know what you mean.
Well, I mean, we are, but we also have one of the most powerful standing militaries in human history. So it's like, and that's because the U.S. dollar still has purchasing power for now, and so that will come to an end eventually. So, like, yes, but in the meantime, they also have nukes and F-7, F-16s, and all sorts of crazy devices that would be a real problem if we ended up in a revolution. So, but yeah, I think the vast majority of libertarians would gladly take that compromise and be like, okay, yeah, cap 10% flat tax, awesome, compared to what we're dealing with today. There are some, hardline libertarians that would still be, any taxation is ultimately, theft and it's an infringement, and I would agree with them. But I think that the vast majority of us would go like, yeah, but we'll still sign on that line to get back to there.
Fantastic. I mean, that's everything that Connor and I were talking about before you jumped on is not in so many words, but the idea of where does the hard line fall for both Christians and libertarians. And so Stephen Wolfe wrote a book called The Case for Christian Nationalism, which in our collective circles, maybe you've heard of it as well, was very, very popular and very controversial because it put forth an affirmative vision, a positive vision of what a Christian nationalist government would look and function like, and the functions that it would serve. And he deals with a similar question on the Christian side. Where is the hard line for Christians, and how and why do we soften that, if at all? And I think ultimately what we're all talking about is like, okay, it would be really easy for a Christian conservative or a libertarian to say like, nope, I'm going to stand on my side of the hard line, and that's just that, and you're just going to have to deal with it. And they can, do that, I suppose. How will the rest of us, how will we know where like the hard line is, where we begin compromising, versus where the hard line is where we can still collaborate? And I think that's the question we're trying to answer. How can we collaborate without compromising on our principles? That's what I struggle with, is like, yes, I want to work with you. And Connor and I were talking about the many Christian conservatives' response to Donald Trump in 2016. They felt that voting for a man who was, he was a man with a history, let's put it that way, and a style and approach would be ultimate. Adultery and, boisterous and, obviously like
egotistical, braggadocious.
Yeah, exactly. And like, so
his
all
own
those things,
sacred cow, false god. Yes.
Yes, very much, very much. And, he appeared to be the guy who could get the job done. Right. He did. Yeah. He did end up being the guy who got some rather important jobs done. So is it compromising on your principles to vote for the candidate who works towards your ends? And that's a question that we all have to figure out how to answer.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, that's always a huge struggle, I think for everybody, because we're almost never offered a candidate that's really, really checking all of our boxes. So
we never will be.
Yeah. And most likely we never will be. I mean, some people feel like Trump is literally everything that they want. So,
right. There's always going to be the cult of personality. There's always going to be that faction, at least.
Yeah. And for me, it's never been about the guy. It's about the principles. Yeah. And I feel like the people that I get along with best, either on the left or the right, are the people that are actually driven by core principles and not by worship of some sort of false god. I can't stand, like even the Bernie Sanders supporters, the ones that were like, no, Bernie's my guy because, he, like, the vast majority of them
flew on his podium.
Yeah, or whatever. But a lot of them were in it for the right reasons, even though I disagreed with them principally. I relate to those people better because I understand their heart, if that makes sense. I don't understand the people that are just like, this is my hero because he talk shit the best. It's
Yeah.
like,
Right.
it's like, who cares, dude? Like, we're trying to stay alive here. Like, I'm trying to have a country for my children, for God's sakes. Like, what are we talking about? That this guy talks smack to CNN the best? Like, this is such a like ridiculous thing. But yeah, I think that, certainly, like, that's what politics is. It's a game of compromise. And I think that that's also kind of what civilization is. It's compromising. That's also what economics is. It's compromising your wants, your desires versus your means, and then the supplier, what they want, what they have, and like supply and demand, and all these calculations that are happening simultaneously. So I'm not averse to compromise, but I am very much averse to signing off on someone that I think is ultimately, even though they may slow the decline, they are not actually improving our trajectory. Like that's what I'm looking for. This is why I'm such a big Ron Paul supporter. This is why I'm such a big Thomas Massie supporter, or Rand Paul supporter for that matter. Like, the guys that I think, if they were actually put, and had their druthers and were actually able to course correct this country, could actually fix things. Donald Trump will not fix things. He might prevent World War III, and for that reason, I might vote for him. But he's not going to fix things. Like, the guy spent an insane amount of money. So that's, I don't know if that makes sense. Yeah, COVID, lockdowns. Oh, yeah, we can go down the whole list of the reasons that I'm upset with him. But he was the best president of my lifetime. So,
right.
It's a low bar, but it's still the reality.
Yeah.
Will, you said something earlier about boomer Christians, and I just wanted to say that I hope this has been refreshing to you, Clint, because I think that's one of the reasons why I want to have this conversation is it feels like, and Will, you can back me up on this if you feel this way too, but it feels like if you're a Christian conservative and you make a point to let people know that people who are not also Christian conservative, whether that be libertarian or whether that be someone on the left or whatever the case may be, there's still this caricature of the boomer Christian in politics that we are automatically associated with. And I think honestly, the reason why I wanted both of you on is because I know both of your content. I've watched you on a lot of different things, Clint. I've known Will for a while now, and we've had him on the show multiple times. And there's just I feel like there's two worlds that don't often meet when it comes to the online Discord. And that's the goal of this conversation, is to kind of unify some of those, because I think to your point, Clint, you probably were surprised to hear Will say, keep the government taxation under 10% or less.
Yeah.
Most times you just hear the sort of the boomer Christian caricature of invade the world, invite the world, even if they wouldn't word it that way. That's ultimately what happens. If their Fox News spits it out enough, they're going to eventually convince them that we got to go to war because it's this righteous thing, and it's not even just war theory, which is another political idea that Christians should subscribe to. But
normally
we
the
haven't
debate
done that.
Normally the debate is 36 or 32% top tax bracket, and it's like,
right,
I'm the conservative. It's like, dude, you want a third of my money and you're a conservative? Are you out of your mind?
Right.
So yeah, no, but see, the reason I'm not caught off guard is because I converse with a lot of younger conservatives, and this is totally expected for me. I think that the issue is that very rarely do conservatives speak to the modern libertarians. Like, they don't hear from us very often, and I think the other thing is that they don't realize how much you guys have come closer to us. Like, I think that's the reason. And I'm not even saying like it's your evolution or anything. I'm just saying, like, the gap has shrunk for whatever reason. I would credit Ron Paul's campaigns with a lot of that it shifted the Overton window in the Conservative Party towards a non-interventionist stance. I think that obviously Trump then took it even closer with this whole America First mantra, and I'm very appreciative of that, for the record, even though he was not entirely America First. I love the fact that he ran on that, and he popularized it, and he made it an acceptable position to hold amongst the broader GOP. It's fantastic progress. I think that the neoconservative movement of the old Republican Guard was disastrous. It absolutely killed you guys. It took you out of power for decades. and rightfully so, because it led the world in a very perilous direction. So I'm very appreciative that like that's a dying breed of conservatism, and I hope that it never rears its ugly head. Even though Nikki Haley is polling at 10% or whatever, and it's like obviously it's not dead entirely, but let's pray she doesn't have a real shot at getting back in.
I don't think she does. I really don't. But
Yeah.
you know, they're trying to force her on us. That's for sure. But
Sure are, man.
you know, I think ultimately I'm trying to become a student of history, and it really does seem like we're actually just getting back to our roots. Honestly, I would really say that that the Bushes are really what took us out of that. Maybe Reagan a little bit, because Reagan was big government more than he should have been, more than he is often credited as being. That's for sure. He gave us so many policies that I think were very damaging. But you know, we're really getting back to our roots of a lot of what we used to be. And the
Ron Paul used to say that all the time.
Yeah,
Ron Paul used to say, like,
Ron Paul.
He's like I'm the only conservative up
so
here.
Many of these people, they really shifted the narrative. Trump really took a lot of Buchanan's policies and really implemented them. And I'm just now honestly discovering Pat Buchanan. So if he's done some horrid things, you know, I'm just gonna give a disclaimer. But great. From what I can tell, he's got amazing policies as well. And these people have shifted the window that I think we really just need to have more of these conversations, so that liberty-minded individuals can realize like we have more allies than we think. We just need to get better at actually picking the right battles and prioritizing. Like let's take care of the nanny state that currently wants to ban incandescent light bulbs. Let's take care of that nanny state first. Did ban them, right? Let's take care of that first. And then if, you know, down the road, when that is a political ash heap, we want to fight about, you know, marijuana legalization. Like, let's have that out, you know, decades down the road when we've actually secured our most important liberties first. And then we can talk about our recreational liberties and whatever else later, you know. And
I would not describe it as a recreational liberty, but I get your point.
Right. I think you understand where I'm coming from, at least. But so I want to talk.
Let me just make one addendum. You know, there are libertarians that you guys would not like nearly as much as you probably like me. You know, there's libertarians that are like, you know, we got to make sure that, you know, the trans community has, you know, their poppy fields that are armed, that are guarded by AK-47s.
Yep,
you know,
I saw that. I don't know if it was the Alabama Libertarian Party,
Louisiana.
But Louisiana Libertarian Party is constantly just blasting that they want the liberty for a drag queen to defend drag queen story hour with a tank or something like that. It's like, is that liberty?
These are not my people, and I don't have any problem with saying that, and they're certainly not your people. You know, I do obviously agree with them on, you know, personal self-defense. You absolutely have that right, but I do not believe that you have the right to, you know, try and indoctrinate kids into some sort of sexual progressive ideology, and I find that to be reprehensible. I don't necessarily want the state involved in cracking down on it, but I certainly think that the parents should have the right to forcibly remove that person from the building. And I think it's crazy that it's happening in public schools. I think it's reprehensible. So that's kind of, but I'm more of a Ron Paul conservative leaning libertarian as it is. So I guess the only point I was trying to make is that, like, there are left leaning libertarians. Right. I don't find them to be really in alignment with many of the fundamental principles of libertarianism. But you can have a much more, like, you can be a much more progressive person in your personal life. Like, you could be a gay dude and, you know, be a libertarian. Like, there's nothing wrong with that either, in my opinion. But they would probably have, with that comes this whole treasure trove of other, you know, beliefs that probably run afoul of what I would see in the world. So,
yeah.
So I'm saying it would be harder for you guys to compromise with those people. That's what I'm trying to say.
For sure, but you've built a good sized audience, so you know that's ultimately my perspective is. I immediately think, okay, Clint's built a great audience, and when I hear him talk, I agree with most of what he says. So why can't we, you know, get together, hold hands, and do what we can where we can? But go ahead, Will. I know you wanted to jump in.
Yeah, I mean, I think that sort of highlights some of the differences, you know, where Christians and libertarians begin to diverge. Is along the idea that as long as you're doing something that doesn't forcibly harm another person, it's okay. And I think I think Clint, you said something that points to the heart of that, which is like you find that reprehensible. But if it's what someone is doing in a consensual way to another person, there's no real grounds to find it reprehensible. Like I'm not saying this is you, but you could have some really lewd and lascivious homosexual acts happening in an orgy, and from libertarian principles, like, well, this is all consensual. Not saying you, but like would say, well, the rights they say, let's say, are inherent in the individual, and so these men are not violating anyone forcibly with violence, so to speak. So that's okay. And I think the Christian would say, no, that's not okay. It's very not okay, because God says that it's not okay. And so that
we will part ways there. Yes.
Correct. But I think that's really important, because if we can't determine a moral, now again, to some extent, not entirely, to some extent, this is a little down the path, but if we can't determine a moral foundation for the people, we won't ever actually get anywhere, and we will be conquered by the most immoral people. That's the thing, is that the people who are currently dominating the American socioeconomic political sphere are deeply immoral people without consciences, who have the ability to do literally illegal acts. They have the ability to lie. They have the ability to do whatever they need to do because they have a worldview that permits it, total power, right? And they have a lack of conscience that forbids it within themselves, or they so submerge their own conscience in the deep freeze by performing reprehensible acts that doesn't bother them. And the only way to combat that is with such a powerful morality rooted in a transcendent nature. That's the only durable way to combat that. And so that is the point where, how do we begin pushing back on a coordinated evil force? And to define evil is doing the wrong thing because it's wrong. You know it's wrong. You do it anyway because you derive a particular benefit from it, financial, pleasure, whatever. That is what we could probably define as evil. You don't fight evil with individualism. You fight evil with good. So where do you root good from? Good can only find transcendent rooting, right? Which is something that transcends space and time. And in order to stand in that place, we have to give up certain things. And that's where the Christians and libertarians begin to diverge, because those things that we give up are things that God tells us we have to give up to live in accordance with his laws, though we may want them. But that's the powerful place to stand. Now, I get that doesn't, we don't need to litigate that now in the context of, I mean, like, well, once and for all, let's go.
No, I mean, I'm just saying you can't give me the whole speech and not let me, try.
Oh, you can. Oh,
yeah.
I just don't want to. I'm making it to the point that, like, for the purposes of finding the overlap of the Venn diagram, like, there is a substantial amount, but there does come a point where we diverge for important reasons.
Yeah. Oh, no disagreement. Absolutely.
Cool.
I think that there is. I understand the Christian perspective that morality can only come from God. I disagree with it personally, because I am agnostic. I don't believe in God, but I still believe that I have probably one of the strongest moral frameworks, and you can allege that comes from Judeo-Christian fundamentals that I have taken in through osmosis or whatever, perhaps. Or it could be that these ideas, even if they're from God, have just been proven empirically through time to be the best for a high functioning personal life. And so for me, I don't like go to the gym and stay faithful to the person I'm with and not focus on material wealth because of God. I do it because I think it's the healthiest way to live. So for me, I don't think that I need God, and I'm sure this will run afoul of your belief system, to live an incredibly moral life. And I think there's a lot of people that feel that way. So I don't necessarily feel that we part ways in that regard. However, I do think that we part ways when it comes to consenting adults performing homosexual acts with one another. And I don't care at all about that. I don't find that to be an item that ultimately degrades society unless it seeps into childhood. And I think that's where I become more of a Christian conservative sounding person when I'm talking about kids, because I do not think that you should be sexualizing children. So
But
I don't know.
why? I mean, imagine. I mean,
Yeah, because I think it's not the foundation of a healthy life. I think that kids are precious, and ultimately that they need to have a foundation where they are not being manipulated into any sort of sexual behavior, so that they can develop that naturally. Because I think that we do have a natural, innate sexual desire, and it takes us in whatever direction. I personally believe that there are people that are born gay. Do you guys disagree with that? I assume so, but I don't know.
um, the topic of homosexuality is a very complicated one. They've never been able to identify a gene
Sure.
and thereby establish it as a genetic aspect. I would say, from a Christian standpoint, I would probably have to say it's the result of some generational curse, unless the person can remember a same-sex sexual encounter in early childhood, which may be a suppressed memory. Homosexuality can also come about as a result of overbearing mothers that separate the young boy from a healthy connection with the father. So he goes searching for too direct of a contact with masculinity later in life. So homosexuality is very complicated. Can you be born gay? Probably, but why would be a good question.
Yeah, well, I do think it's interesting because it obviously dooms your bloodline, or at least it would have historically before adoption for gay couples was permissible. So I do think that that's an interesting dynamic, but I think that there's a fair argument to be made that it's some sort of course correction for an overpopulated area, that like civilizationally or genetically or whatever, it just helps society by not having so many people reproducing, because you don't have gay people reproducing. I like maybe that's why it comes about naturally, because it does happen through so many other species too. I don't have a firm opinion on that, but really all I was trying to say is that I don't like the idea of the state setting a moral framework that is enforced via violence, really harsh violence, to try and create this cultural framework that I find to be best. Because I still keep open the idea that my idea of best may be wrong, and I never want to use state violence to try and enforce my morality on someone when my own personal morality has changed as I've evolved over the past couple decades. For instance, I've become much more pro-life leaning than I was when I was younger. And if I had gone the other, if I had thought that state violence was righteous in maintaining pro-choice 20 years ago, and they had, gone around, violently enforcing that ability, I would feel really bad about that. So I don't know. I just think that, particularly when it comes to consenting adults, I just think the state should have no say in what they do, as long as it's genuinely consensual. There's obviously gray areas with people that are mentally incapacitated and things like that, but I won't bore you with all that.
So something that Will brought up earlier is he talked about the three spheres, and I think something that I would just say, mostly because we can't litigate all these things tonight, just in terms of people have been trying to do this for years and years and years, and we won't get it done in one podcast. But something just as maybe something for you to think about, Clint, at least from our perspective. There's currently a lot of dialogue on figuring out exactly what roles each of these spheres are allowed to take on. But for the most part, there's quite a bit of consensus among a lot of the, again, 2023 Christian conservative individuals that are actually really studying these issues.
By the way, can I just say real quick? I love
ahead.
the fact that the younger, or the new iteration of Christian conservatives, seem much more interested in like studiousness when it comes to these issues. Like they are actually, like, it just seems much more, I don't know. It's a much more measured approach. It seems like they're actually trying to get like actual information to back up their beliefs, as opposed to like, God, the Bible said this is so it shall pass. It's like I just think it's a much better tactic. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, and all I was going to say is that there's a pretty wide consensus that the state uses the ability of the sword, in very rare instances. I would say one of the spheres that has the greatest responsibility would be the family, and then of course the church. Like, so for example, someone caught in addiction, I would say, most individuals would hope that the family or the church would intervene to save that person from their addiction before the state would ever have to step in.
Yes.
And I think that there's currently a debate emerging of individuals, and again, a lot of this is because we're looking back into Protestant history, and we're actually looking at a lot of the lost teachings of our church fathers that conveniently were kind of brushed away, as so much of our history often is, for political convenience or whatever reasons may be. But really, like, even the prison system, a lot of individuals are really arguing that that's not biblical. Really, they're just two forms of roles that the state should take in disciplinary actions, and that would be like restitution, like actually paying to try to make up for someone's for the wrongs that you've caused someone, and then of course on other occasions using the rod. And by the rod, I mean, like, there are probably individuals that caught shoplifting that should honestly get a paddling and then set loose, as opposed to thrown in jail for 10 years. And maybe that would be more of a, I mean, you could call it state violence, but I'm talking very measured, as opposed to overbearing. Anyways,
for the record, I don't oppose state violence when it comes to defense of property rights, or the individual.
Yeah.
If you're violated violently, I think that the person ought to be put behind bars. But obviously, I would like to see it privatized. I would like to see it held
Right.
at the most local level. I have many changes that I would like to make, but I think that force, if someone violates someone else's personal sovereignty, is absolutely justified. It's just a dispute over who has the moral authority to implement that. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, and that's just it. As I would also say that the Christian worldview would very much lend to the fact that the state should be as local as possible. We actually see that, in with Moses and the Israelites. His father-in-law Jethro came to him and said that you basically can't handle all these problems. So you need to appoint. He essentially told him to appoint a hierarchy of elders where one person would be in charge of 10, and then basically it was a structure that was very localized, so that the issue would be handled at the most local level, and only if it needed to escalate would it escalate. And that's what we really see in our federalized system when it works properly. Obviously, that's a whole other story.
That's the local judge versus Supreme Court at the state level versus Supreme Court federally. Yeah, I get it.
Right. And I guess all that to say is really what I think Will is getting at is, ultimately, it's just in the rare instances where the state has to step in, we have to figure out, okay, what is the rules that keeps the state reined in? What are the rules that keep the family in their proper sphere? What are the rules that keep the church in its proper sphere? Because of course we can talk about a tyrannical church. We can talk about a family. My pastor does not have the right to spank me if I've done something wrong in my home. That would be the church overstepping its sphere. And we're ultimately trying to figure out, okay, what's the roadmap that defines the spheres in which these three institutions operate? And that's ultimately, I think you've mentioned a lot about what you say that is the healthy way to live. And I would say you probably derive a lot of that from nature and observed facts. And that's a very Christian idea as well. We believe that God has given us nature as a testimony to him. We believe that nature can show us what God is, and that there is a God. And we believe that scripture tells us who God is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that makes sense. I'm not even, when I say I'm agnostic, like, I'm genuinely open to even Jesus being, or God being God, like your God being God. I don't know. I just keep it open for further review. But yeah, I'm very much like in alignment with the Christian perspective from much of what I see in Christian life. I think that the best Christians I know live a beautiful life, and I totally honor that, and I try and model it to a large extent, except for Sundays when I'll be watching football and you guys will be in church. But I don't think that there's like, for instance, Ron Paul was he's a Christian, and he was a obstetrician, and he was responsible for giving birth to like thousands of kids or something like that. And I think that he's lived a truly honorable, beautiful life. And in many ways, I've tried to model my adult life after what I've seen from him. Even though I haven't gotten married or haven't had kids yet, I certainly would like to at some point. So, I don't even know where I'm going with this. Sorry.
No, you're fine.
May I ask you a question, Clint?
Sure.
So you said that you follow a certain set of values because it helps you live. I don't want to put words in your mouth. You said like an optimal life or a healthy life, something like that.
Yeah, I just think it's like the framework to excel, like to have a happy, healthy, successful life. I think that many of the principles in Christianity align with that.
Okay. So does everyone have to want that same thing as you do?
No.
Okay. So a man can choose to not exercise and eat disgusting, fake food and, smoke drugs and whatever, and genuinely let himself go. And that's okay if he chooses.
It's okay from what I would prescribe to the government's role. Yes, it's totally okay. If he was a friend of mine, I would be advising him, probably not a good path to be on, friend.
Right. So between those two men who are not friends, who live, they don't even know each other. They live two completely, totally different lives with completely different moral frameworks. Is it possible for those two men to work together to form a cohesive government that works towards the good of all, given that those two men have very different ideas of what the good is?
I mean, possibly. It's unlikely, just simply because his lifestyle likely coincides with his own belief system, which will almost certainly want a larger state, one that will look after him, because his bad behavior has not prepared him for the future, whereas my lifestyle has prepared me to succeed without the government. So he will probably prescribe a much larger state, and for that reason, we will be at loggerheads.
But so even if he doesn't prescribe that's a reasonable conclusion, and I agree with it. But even if it doesn't prescribe a larger state, between those two sets of values, it proposes the same size state. Between those two sets of values, how do you determine who wins? Because those are two very different ways of living that end in two very different places. That there's not a lot of compromise between them. How do you decide what value set to govern by? Assuming the size of the state is equal.
Well, I mean, if we were to assume that the size of the state is equal at the level I want it, then it won't matter what his belief system is or his lifestyle is, because there will not be a social safety net for him, because the state will not be large enough to require theft from me to maintain him in his old age as he's in the hospital dying from diabetes or whatever. So that's where it becomes an issue, is that the magnitude of the state then makes us basically intimately linked, whether we like it or not. Whereas a very, very small state makes it so that his bad behavior and his lifestyle choices that I find to be self-destructive are ultimately that he will bear those costs, as opposed to myself and the broader civilization bearing those costs.
Okay.
But I think I know where you're going with this, so go ahead.
Well, I mean, there's a couple different directions. One is that, in the libertarian view that a man is free to determine his own path through life, stated by, your own stated values, which are living in a maximum healthy, optimal life. That in itself is a value, is a highest value that you've chosen. But
Sure.
what ability, that helps you lead what you might say is a moral life, but you don't have a right to impose by your own, and you're within your own system. You don't have a right to impose that on another person.
Correct.
So you can get someone else going in a completely different direction that you still have to manage to form a government with, though you have two completely different value sets, that there might not be any overlap for them. There might not be any compromise possible. So that's the first direction that I want to take it in.
Well, I mean, that's certainly true, but if the state isn't large, then it really isn't that relevant, and I think that the reason it's become so relevant is because the state is enormous, and ultimately, like, my life savings, my security, my safety, the nature of the tyranny that I have to deal with is a product of the general degeneration of the rest of the young men around me. But it doesn't have to be that way. If the state wasn't so large, it wouldn't so much concern me. And if there was actual enforcement of property rights, so that this guy whose life gets derailed and then he starts to shoplift or he starts to use drugs and he's homeless. Well, in my civilization, there's private property rights, so I can actually evict him from any of these areas. There would be no issues of these homeless encampments in San Francisco because it's public property. Like these. But this is where, like, I actually wanted to extrapolate on this because I know you guys have talked about Christian nationalism. I'm not so much opposed to Christian nationalism. I don't necessarily want to live under it, but I'm also very much an advocate for peaceful secession. Like, I would like to see New Hampshire be my state, where my people of my ideological beliefs can try out our ideas. You guys can have Texas or whatever state is most, prone to Christian nationalism. And I would probably love to visit your state because I don't find your belief set to be that different from my own. And simultaneously, I would not mind California being the degenerate socialist hellhole that it is, if they want to continue on that trajectory. The issue is that we do not allow for peaceful secession, that we have this overbearing national federal government that is making it so that's impossible. And that if we were to try and peacefully secede, it would be a violent bloodbath because we've already had that precedent set under Lincoln. I guess I don't even know where I was going with it, but just to say, I don't mind there being so much differences in our worldviews, as long as we are able to peacefully separate and have our own governance system that, like, hey, if you're living a terrible lifestyle and you're starving, well, you better not come to New Hampshire, brother. like go to California where that is the lifestyle that's uplifted. Let's see how it works long term. Let's see if the state can actually stand. The answer will be no. It will not stand for very long. And I think that is the course correction that is actually missing in civilization, is that we do not allow people to pay the consequences of their behavior, because we live in a nanny state that is ultimately insolvent and will be proven to be very soon. So I would like to just have the ability to part ways and allow us not to go down with the Titanic of socialist, governance. And at this point, we don't have that option. We have a little bit of variety when going to Florida or Texas or New Hampshire, as it is today, thank God, because of federalism. But it's not perfect because the federal government has totally run amok. Mm-hmm. That was a hell of a rant. I'm sorry to.
No. That's awesome. I think the answer that I hear is that to the dilemma that I kind of pose is, you have two men with two very different moral value systems, is that the way that it gets worked out is that we'll just see how it plays out over time, whose moral system is superior. Yes. Right. So okay. I'm glad I heard you correctly. So the Christian response to that is to turn to say the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 28, where God lists an enormous list of blessings for those who follow his law. That here are the laws that I lay down for you, and here are the enormous, overwhelming, bountiful blessings for those who keep to my laws, and the rather frightening, shocking curses that come from those who violate it. And so the security that a Christian has is that there is no ambiguity in terms of the outcome when you have two people with competing moral value systems, because God makes promises and says those who keep my laws will prosper righteously, and those who do not will be cursed and destroyed. Versus, the mode that you propose is like, well, we'll see how it plays out. It may play out in terms of 50 or 100 years of conflict as like, yes, you personally have a very rigid moral value system, and you have this guy over here, who's like going his own way. And then maybe it plays out that things correct to you, or maybe it plays out that you are the one being corrected. And this is an iterative process that could play out over a long period of time. Whereas the Christian has a value system that says good, bad, follow this, good things, don't follow it, bad things. And that comes ready-made, baked into the fabric of reality that we can discover via the function of our own conscience, that alerts us to things that are morally reprehensible. That our conscience and our mind is what lets us know right and wrong, and that appears to some extent to be innate. And that's how that's God's representative inside our mind of what's right and wrong. Yes, it can be conditioned under some circumstances. There are cultural aspects around conscience. Some cultures, for example, it's rude to belch after a meal. Like in the United States, like in Egypt, it's considered rude if you don't belch, and your conscience would be, so to some extent it's conditioned, but to some extent the healthy conscience isn't. And so that is one example of what points to a transcendent moral law that's available to us, and that actually underlied the founding of America way back when. It wasn't the full manifestation at the time. So I just want to propose those two, that we do have a moral law that actually can live a righteous and upright and healthy life. And just to tie it with this boomer question, unfortunately, I think the saddest thing is that these boomers who appear to have represented Christianity for the past 60 or 80 years have represented anything but the most watered down, Americanized, commercialized, homogenized, prepackaged, Zionist, dispensationalist version of Christianity that's got nothing to do with historic
Preach, brother,
faith.
preach.
Cool. So I'm excited for this dialogue to happen, because I think that there are a lot of libertarians who will discover that there is a new form of Christian who's proposing something that they can actually see themselves reflected in, and to find the similarities that we have in terms of the desire to live what we might call an upright and righteous moral life.
Yeah,
there will still be this moral slice of, there are things that God says are not okay, and we just have to trust that they're not okay, even if we want to do them. That could be a friction point, but we can handle that set of topics separately.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I don't disagree with the vast majority of that, and I do think that there is a morality that is kind of transcendent. I think that's kind of evidenced by the fact that so many of these principles traverse the different religions. That so many of them are shared, and also shared by tribes, and shared by religions that we're not even really super familiar with. It just seems as if much of this is truly natural, and I think that is the foundational belief set that formed America, that I align myself with, is kind of these natural rights type of mentality, and much of that comes from Christian belief sets, but not all of it. So it's very interesting to me, but I disagree with one aspect of what you said, is that, well, if we take my path, then it could be decades of fighting, and it would, it may be 50 or 100 years.
Iteration.
Okay, but it's the exact same thing with us living under what is much closer to your ideological framework, your religious framework, in terms of the people that, in terms of what they espouse, not necessarily how they live, as you've already lamented. But it's like, these people aren't ruling over us in libertarian principles.
Correct.
They're not even pretending to, for the most part. They do pretend to do that from a Christian worldview. So like, I've always found this fascinating, that like Christians, like Christian conservatives, tend to attack. I'm not saying you guys at all.
But
I'm saying broadly, they tend to attack the libertarians as like, this is the reason that the GOP is so broken. And it's like, no. The GOP is broken because you guys aren't Christian.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, we completely agree with that. You'll find no pushback from me. Yeah,
I just think it's hilarious though, because they're always like, well, we've gay marriage and now the whole world fell apart. It's like, dude, that is not it. I mean, that may be a part. I'll give you that. Maybe it is. I don't even know. But it's just hilarious to me that like the libertarians, who have had no political power forever, and they're the ones that are demonized or pilloried. It's just weird to like, I'm just speaking as for the broader libertarian community, we have always found it humorous, and we don't understand it at all. So just
the fake Christian thing. Yeah. Oh yeah. It's a giant tragedy.
No. Sorry. I meant the thing that we found funny is that we're the ones that get blamed for like
that you're
downfall.
The scapegoat.
Yeah, that we're blamed for the downfall of the American empire. And I'm like, dude, it's neoconservatives and also obviously socialists and globalists and a whole bunch of other ists that I'm not fond of. But it's just clearly not libertarians that have been responsible for this. If it were all Thomas Massey's, I don't think we would be anywhere near in such a dire circumstance. So.
Yeah, I do not blame you for any of that. That's the silliest thing, and just to say that, like, what? No.
It'll happen. You'll see it now that I've mentioned it to you. You will see it. It happens periodically. Really? Like Matt Walsh or one of these guys will just drag libertarians and be like, it's because we listened to y'all. It's like y'all didn't listen to us. We were saying stop the empire building, stop the endless war, stop the endless spending, stop the socialized healthcare, stop. You didn't listen to us the entire time, so we certainly shouldn't be held to account for it. I just think it's fun.
I think it's because they conflate the Louisiana LP with libertarianism, and they kind of like scale that at large, and they say, "Oh yeah, you're so libertarian that you can have drag queens in the classroom," and it's like
Right.
that's not what the popular libertarians are arguing. Like, just to put it bluntly, like you're one of the bigger names in libertarian commentary.
And Dave Smith is the biggest, and he ain't popularizing that at all. So
right, exactly, and that's where, to me, like that's where I've seen you on, with Luke. I've seen you on Timcast. I've seen your own podcast. I saw so much of what you were espousing, and I'm just thinking to myself, like there's just these two realms that misunderstand each other so much. And that ultimately at the end of the day, if Dave Smith was our president, I mean, I would absolutely
be stoked.
be stoked beyond all belief. And at the same time, I think if it's hard to say, because I don't think there's anyone that I can think of that's fully representing the sort of movement that the sort of grassroots movement that's coming up currently in the Christian circles. There's not really someone that embodies that perfectly. But if someone like that was in the White House, I think you would be stoked as well, because ultimately we would be moving the needle so much closer back to just regaining liberties that have long since been lost, and
Agreed.
honestly, reversing so much of the decline that our country has undergone, and that's ultimately where these conversations, I think, are so important. I mean, I'd love to have more of these conversations, because there's a lot of the practical stuff that we didn't get to, of like what do we actually do? How do we take this conversation and move forward? Because that's where I think we immediately are like, oh, disagree, and then that's where
he's got the answer.
Go ahead, Will. Go ahead.
We blow up the Federal Reserve.
You just got us nuked from YouTube, homie.
Metaphorically.
in Minecraft also.
Yeah.
I'll just say he did not mean that literally, and also based.
Yeah.
Of course I didn't mean it literally.
Exactly.
I mean, and blow it up like a balloon.
Let me do a quick little rant on that. I think that this is the other thing that conservatives, I'm not saying you guys, but the older guard, would have definitely benefited from listening to libertarians on, is that so much of our cultural decline is a product of a debased currency system. And
1,000%.
Yeah, like it's
Totally.
it's just heartbreaking. Like the fact that the family unit has been divided because both parents are in the workforce. That's almost inevitably a product of a devaluating currency, or an inflating currency, if you will.
Jimmy Song, Fiat Ruins Everything.
Oh, okay.
Excellent book about
it's backwards for me.
It's backwards. Oh, it's back. Oh, sorry. Yeah. So Jimmy Song, Fiat Ruins Everything is a book about that. So I was wondering if it was backwards or not. Okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
The text was backwards, but I'm sure it's a great book, and I completely agree. And I think that non-interventionism, like, this is why I love the America First iteration of conservatism, because it seems as if they are getting away from much of what degraded the conservative movement and ultimately took them out of power. My fear is that it's too late. That the damage has been done, the economic damage has been done, the people that are in positions of power are still leading us astray so rapidly. They're so full of crap. They don't actually believe any of the things that they say. And but I am simultaneously quite hopeful that this new generation is seeing all of these pitfalls, seeing all of these errors, and not trusting these people to remedy it. So we'll see. We'll see if it's not too late. We're gonna find out in the not too distant future. So it's going to be interesting.
Yeah. And we don't have time to get into all the practicalities, but I think that's ultimately my goal when I just think of what I hope to accomplish with these conversations is if we can even just get someone that can slow the decline. I think that there is a grassroots change happening in our culture where so many individuals are currently First of all, there's a lot of individuals that are just waking up to the realities of they've been lied to by corporate media, corporate institutions, yada yada. But then there's also this grassroots movement of people going back to tradition and asking really big questions that are leading a lot of people to the faith, that are leading a lot of people just on these faith journeys. I mean, Will has an incredible faith journey too. That he's told on other podcasts that if you're ever interested, Clint, it's a super interesting one. And Will is just one of many people that are currently undergoing that because the world's falling apart and people are looking for answers. And so my mindset is if we can have someone that can just slow the decline long enough for some of this stuff to take root, then we can potentially actually see the turnaround, like whether that be a Donald Trump figure or whoever the case is. If someone was able to just slow things down long enough for us to see this actually play out, I think we could see some lasting results. But I mean, you're right. I mean, it's hard to say if it's too late. I just pray that it's not, and I just am going to do my part to slow it down because, like I said, I think that the real work is happening below the surface, and I'm hoping we'll be able to last long enough to see that bubble up in our culture and our country.
I agree, man, and whether or not it's too late for us economically or like financially in terms of defending the U.S. dollar is not really what I'm concerned about, because I have full faith in the ingenuity and entrepreneurial nature of humanity, but more specifically Americans, that we can build back in whatever comes from that. Where I get very disenchanted and concerned is the potential for world war. And it looks like we are speeding towards that. And it's very natural in the end of an empire to see this come to pass. The Thucydides trap, everyone knows about this stuff. And it's right. like that's the danger. That like if we can avoid a World War III with multiple nuclear powers, well then okay, maybe we can actually survive this. If we don't, well then yeah, it's over.
Doesn't
so like
matter.
Yeah, it's like it really doesn't matter at that point. But we can survive the death of the dollar. We cannot survive a full-on nuclear war. So I think that's what I'm most hopeful for, is that because the conservatives already experienced the war on terror, they already understand what a disaster that was, most of them at least, that they will not be gung-ho to be launching towards that. And I think that gives us a lot of reason for hope. Fingers crossed. I don't know.
Yeah, I just want to speak to a couple of the scenarios that were painted earlier. So Connor mentioned my testimony. I've actually been to more than 30 countries around the world. And I hear people talk about, and that's given me a unique perspective on what it is like outside of the United States. And I hear about, I hear the very real concerns about collapse of the dollar. But one of the things that isn't obvious is that would absolutely collapse the entire world.
Yes.
If the entire world is so thoroughly dependent on the health of the American economy, including China and Israel.
Agreed.
And so I think that similar to the discussion of nuclear war, the incentives are so low, or exactly opposite, to do something like that, that I think that the slow transition to like a central bank digital currency, assuming they can even pull it off, because honestly, like the elites, for all their supposed power, really behave kind of like clown car sometimes. Like it's kind of funny to watch. Like, and so that's the really strange thing is like they kind of like go, ooh, boogie boogie, we're gonna take, and then it's like, and then they just fall flat on their face. So it's quite odd. But I think that ultimately the incentives are not there for global thermonuclear war to destroy this wonderful prison, this prison planet they've built. It's kind of like they built, if you think of it in terms of the Matrix, like they've built this giant energy farm, and I don't think they're going to blow up the farm that they built. And I think they've also successfully turned the United States into a giant energy farm. I don't think they're really going to blow that up either. I think the incentive is really to just keep it, pumping out sucking out the life force of millions of Americans, rather than dynamite it and take the world with it. That's how I see things. But I do get that threats are really real, and that I think the real threat is like the slow continued construction of the digital prison. But if I can say that Donald Trump did one thing confirmed that I really don't doubt, is that he threw a stumbling block on the elite's plans. Like if he did nothing else, like, if Hillary Clinton had gotten elected in 2016, like game over. But
yeah,
like
we probably would have had a hot war with Russia.
For sure, and also because they hadn't fully castrated the males yet. Like, where are they going to get all the capable males to subdue all the capable? Where are they going to get? This is the joke I make. Where are they going to get all the capable males to subdue all the capable males?
Right.
You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
yes, we do have a really powerful army, but like, how many of those people will just defect instantly? Like, you can look up Red Team Planner. It was like a Reddit thread that happened years ago where, within allegedly within the U.S. government, this was like one of those pre leaks, pre 4chan kind of leaks once that phenomenon started. So this predated all of that, where these government teams were kind of planning like, well, waging war, assuming they could do it against the U.S. population. And they found that at least 50%, this was in like 2012 or something, they found that at least 50% of the military would defect instantly, making war against the population impossible.
Yeah.
And they would take materiel with them. Right. So there are a lot of backup plans, but I think that the elite's freedom to move is much narrower than it seems sometimes.
I agree with you on that. Yeah.
Yeah.
But let me just say though, tonight, actually, I think it was Senator Dick Durbin on the House floor said that they intend to offer citizenship to all the illegal immigrants that have come over the past couple of years. And it's like, yeah, that's how they try and get the military age fighting males to be replenished, is to just offer citizenship to all the foreigners that have come across the border. So it's like they always have additional plans. And let me just explain one other thing. The reason that the US dollar hasn't died already is because it's the reserve currency of the world, because it's utilized by trillions of US dollars are all over the world. And if they were all domestically, we would already be experiencing hyperinflation. So like, you're right that it takes a lot of bad behavior to ultimately collapse the dollar, but they are behaving that badly. And if they don't course correct soon, it will become a global depression inducing event. And I think that's like the Austrian school lesson that I hope has been transferred over from the Ron Paul GOP movement into the Trump movement. Based off of his spending, it doesn't appear that it was implemented in practice. So it makes me nervous about a second term for him, that he won't take it as seriously as he needs to, because he wants so badly to be loved, but he doesn't want so badly to actually fix what needs to be fixed. And I don't,
that's my concern too.
But he could have, if he wants, this is what I would like to see people encouraging Trump with, is to say, if you want to be loved, do the right things and save this country. If he wants to be loved, like, and I'm not talking about love today, I'm talking about loved forever. If he wants to be a legend, which a dude like that wants to be a legend, right? Well, then just do the right things, man. Like, actually cut spending, massively cut spending, but drive us into a harsh recession, like very unpopular things that would probably make people hate him in the interim, but could actually put us on solid foundation for the next century. Like, he has that capacity in him if he wants it. And I just hope that he doesn't want the short-term hug over the long-term worship. Like, I'm trying to play off his ego just because I know how he functions, but I hope you guys get what I'm saying.
Yeah. I mean, I hope he has the strength to do that as well. And what I've said about him is everyone wants to be the God Emperor until it's time to do God Emperor shit.
Right.
Right. Yeah. You want to wear the robe and the crown. It's like, all right, are we actually going to do some God Emperor stuff? No. Oh, okay. Well, cool. That was fun. Thanks.
Yeah. But we're going to find out soon if he's not put in prison for 700 years.
Yep. Exactly. Yeah. Well, gentlemen, with that's probably a good place to wrap it up. But yeah, this is a great episode. We definitely need to have more of these conversations. And I don't know, Clint, you and I need to talk, get more people talking in these same spheres. Just need to maybe collaborate more often, and maybe we'll see some real positive movement from that. But I want to go ahead and let you guys both sign off and tell people where they can find you. First, though, if you guys are interested, those listening back to the replay or watching this live next week, we do a lot of topical conversations. We've been doing much more topics as opposed to just news commentary like we used to be doing. We're kind of shifting gears here, and next week we're going to be talking all about the importance of telling a good story, and specifically we're talking about a lot of the fictional works that have really built the society that we see, and what exactly allows a story to transcend time, similar to what we were talking about with with Trump? What would allow his story to transcend time, right? We're going to be exploring some of those options with Faith Moore. She's actually the daughter of Andrew Klavan from the Daily Wire, for those of you who know him. And Michael should be back as well, hopefully. Fingers crossed. He's very busy these days. That's why he's in and out. But either way, join us for that next Monday, 8 p.m. live if you want to catch it live, or just find us on Apple, Google, Spotify, and the works. But Will, where can people go to find you and keep up with everything that you're doing?
You can find everything that I do by going to renofmen.com/links. That's RENOFMEN.com, like Renaissance of Men, but shorter. And from there, you can find my podcast, The Renaissance of Men. I release weekly interview episodes, extended interviews, 1, 2, 3, sometimes 4, even 5 hours long, talking about theology, Bitcoin, Christian nationalism, faith, and all kinds of other topics. That comes out weekly. You can find me causing trouble on Instagram and on Twitter, mostly these days, at Ren of Men. And I also do one-on-one men's mentorships and have a men's accountability group called The Council. You can find all of that at renofmen.com/links.
Awesome. Clint, where can people find you?
At Liberty Lockpod on Twitter. Liberty Lockdown is the show on YouTube and Rumble. I am currently suspended on YouTube, so I will be back over there in 3 weeks. But in the meantime, you can find all my new episodes on any audio podcatcher. Just subscribe to Liberty Lockdown. And I also do a live show 2 hours a night with Luke Rudkowski over on, all one word, We Are Change on Rumble. We just signed an exclusive deal, and it is we do it, well, it's exclusive for 1 hour. We do 1 hour over on YouTube, but you can watch the entire 2 hours, and the second hour is totally insane because we're finally have the YouTube leashes taken off of us. So it's very profane and fun and hilarious and great. So check that out. It's all one word, We Are Change, aka the best political podcast.com.
Awesome.
What'd you do to get banned from YouTube?
I had on the QAnon shaman.
Oh, that'll do it.
Oh, wow. All right.
Oops.
You didn't talk about blowing up the Fed.
No, we didn't do anything, dude. That's the most upsetting part about it, is like they said that we were endorsing violence, and I was like, the entire time, like I had the QAnon shaman lead me through a 5-minute guided meditation. Like,
Oh my goodness.
like what? And then we just like lamented the state of the union, essentially. So it was an absurdity, but it's clear that because he's running for Congress, they wanted to get rid of some of his other interviews, and mine was one that got hit.
Got it.
Good grief.
Sorry about
That's
that.
ridiculous.
Oh, don't worry about it. This is old hat for me. I've been struck like 5 times. It'll fall off in a month, and then I'll be right back at it.
Cool. Cost of doing business.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, to that point, everyone follow us on Twitter/X at Forge and A. We would really appreciate it. We give a lot of updates there. Thank you all so much for joining us. Will, Clint, thank you both for joining me. It was a great conversation, and we will see you all next time.